Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of the Faitheism Project podcast. My name is Alan Katz. I've always been grateful to Hebrew School for making me the atheist I am today.
And my name is Randy Lovejoy, and I am a pastor outside of the church, going deeper inside of the faith, which just happens to be the title of the book I'm working on right now as well. And it is great to be here with you again, Alan.
Isn't there a saying, the Lord loves those that plug themselves?
Yes, something
or no,
like
is it the
that.
Lord plugs those that plugs themselves? Yeah, that must be. The Lord plugs those that plugs themselves.
Yeah, that's about, I think, as biblical as you pull yourself up by the bootstraps or something. People quote that as a Bible verse. It's like, that sounds a lot more Western, like Texas. I don't know.
Your bootstraps. Was it Marshall Moses?
That's right.
So today we're talking about is America experiencing a pandemic of the soul as we shift here in California from a pandemic stance to an endemic, living with an endemic stance.
Yeah.
Okay, the pandemic part then, all right, that might be passé, but there is still stuff clutching onto us. And I think I don't think it's radical to suggest that America has been experiencing a pandemic of the soul, maybe before the real pandemic set in, but certainly the pandemic itself seems to have exacerbated a pre-existing condition. Can we say?
Yeah. And a slightly different variation on that. I think it's just accelerated a number of things that were already going on.
I prefer your word.
And I think that it just, put it on a much faster pace. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, it feels, again, another variant may come up sometime, who knows, but at least at this point, the numbers are dropping. It feels like we've come a long way. Like maybe it's safe to say we're in a new chapter, maybe. But boy, which is great. But then at the same time, I think that's where we can suddenly slow down and start to notice, all the aches and pains that we've got. It's like when you do some tough exercise or something, sometimes you do the workout and then it's after the workout that you start to realize, oh, wow, this really hurts. And ow, I'm kind of wiped out and this is really tight. It feels like we're kind of in one of those kind of situations.
What, as you sit here today, would you say your soul's takeaways are of having endured the pandemic?
Yeah.
What have you learned on that level?
I think on the one hand, it's brought me back to what is most important and what really matters. And there's a lot of other things that I just aren't, don't matter so much to me at this point that would have before. So I think that's a more positive, in a positive way. It's like it's enabled me to redouble or refocus on the core stuff that really matters in my life. So I'd say that's a positive. I think there's a lot of other things that I'm not sure are positive that are the result of, well, I guess the way I'd look at it is that I think all of it is, we kind of had a rhythm to our lives one way or another before the pandemic. Then the pandemic came in and shut down pretty much all of that, or almost all of that. One way or another, it changed our relationships, it changed our working habits, it changed just everything. And I think, again, there's benefits to that. I mean, that's why people fast as a discipline. You pull away from food or activities or whatever for a time to reflect on that. But it's also, when it's a forced thing on everybody for an extended period of time, you also lose good habits or good rhythms that refresh you. And I think we feel it kind of deeply, relationships being a key part of this. I think just the way we relate and the way we do community has really shifted for a lot of people. And it's still kind of unclear, what how that's going to rebuild, or if it's going to rebuild, or what. I don't know. How about you? I mean, what are some of the things you'd identify as being lasting effects?
On the plus side, I gained a new appreciation for friends and one's social group.
Yeah.
And how good it is to have a social group and to see the people in your social group.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good to be reminded how important that is and how important those relationships are to one's sense of well-being.
Right.
In a world where I think one of the things that is infected is trust. And I think that's part of why I think we feel like there's a pandemic of the soul. There's a profound loss of trust that has occurred on many, many levels. And I think that's why it's so debilitating. It's not just the trust in even one individual.
Yeah.
It's in the concept of the whole thing that we're all supposed to be doing together.
Yeah. And I think in an odd way, to me, where a lot of the distrust and mistrust has happened, at least part of it was, I think we had kind of a sense that as a human race, we kind of had everything more or less under control. It's like, we can handle the problems that come our way. If we just gather together, implement whatever policies, do whatever, then we're going to be fine. And I think the challenge is something like a pandemic is it's just such a massive reminder that we aren't actually in control of our destiny. And I think our leaders, I mean, this is at least where it hit me the most. Our leaders then came in and said, we're going to control this pandemic, was basically the narrative. And the fact is, we can't, by definition of a pandemic, that means you don't control it. I mean, that's the point of it. And so I feel like there was a lot of trust lost because leaders promised stuff, and we even assumed that they were able to do that, and yet it didn't happen.
I think I know why.
Okay.
They took the approach that they take with a natural disaster. And
that makes sense.
The thing about a natural disaster is, except for earthquakes, which we live with, there's a degree of planning. You might not know when and where the tornado is going to hit, but you can have a little bit of a degree of warning that a storm cell that can produce a tornado. Hurricanes, of course.
Yeah.
The weather that the excuse me.
Sure.
The weather that a lot of the rest of the country is enduring. This is all predictable. A pandemic, while it is predictable to a certain degree, to a larger degree, it's not.
Yeah, and it's not controllable. It's one of these,
not in anything like the same way. And part of the problem is that that force of nature that is disruptive, it can be each and every one of us.
Yes.
Each and every one of us can become a tidal wave unto ourselves. We
Well,
are
and-
a tsunami.
Even if you go with the tsunami, though, there's like the tsunami builds, happens, and it's done. I mean, that's the other part of it. But with a pandemic, it's like maybe it's done, maybe it's not done.
Because my tsunami can produce your tsunami, and your tsunami can produce other people's tsunamis. And so tsunamis go in every bloody direction. And it's
and the boundaries we set up were rather ineffective in many cases, or we thought we had it nailed down, and then something would happen, and oh no, it got here, let's try to shut it down, and then it would spread. And
in a natural disaster, like when a place floods and they tell people, get out. There are always a few people who okay, I'm not going to stay and I'm going to guard my property, blah, blah, blah. And hey, you're on your own.
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury with the pandemic because, hey, if you want to go off into the woods by yourself and not get vaccinated, okay. But the problem is, if you walk among us, you can infect every single one of us. And so it's a whole other set of
right. But buried,
rules and regs.
Buried even within that, though, I mean, I think part of it, hopefully we're a little more humbled in the sense of our ability to actually control things because of this. Because then we can celebrate the amazing things we did pull off, like with what you were just saying. You know, we're so fighting over vaccinations, policies, and all of that I feel like our celebration of pulling off vaccines in such a small amount of time and then getting them out to large numbers of people, you know, that in itself, I'm pretty sure if you compared that historically, we'd be light years ahead of responses in the past. And I feel like it's almost like because of the distrust, because things were promised that couldn't be fulfilled, because of that, we missed the opportunity even to celebrate the fact that, you know what, we actually did a pretty dang good job of coming up with a vaccine and getting it out to people. That should be celebrated.
I agree. And I think history will be kinder to us about this than we are to ourselves.
I think so. I think
harsher. I think history will look back at, yes, it will never even notice all the little infighting that happened in and around it. They'll simply note this remarkable achievement was pulled off, and perhaps, you know, or maybe one version is a wider, more terrifying pandemic was averted by what we did.
And, you know, I think some of the processes that were used in the development of the vaccine are going to help us in future pandemics, again, to be able to respond in a quicker way. And hopefully our leaders will have learned enough that when it hits again, although it'll, you know, it may not be till the next generation, and we kind of forget stuff pretty quickly as a people. But you know, it's like, hopefully we'll you know, be better able to say, look, pandemic, remember your parents, grandparents, or great grandparents, they had to deal with the coronavirus, you know, and here's the stuff we've learned. We're gonna fast track the vaccines work, but we're also going to recognize that we can't control this thing, but we can slow its process. We can implement what we learned from the last time. We can do this together in a way that'll bring a solution. You know, so all of that just to say, in terms of our own souls now, you know, to me, part of it is look at the big picture. One thing you can celebrate is that you made it through this, and that, you know, as a human race, we came up with a solution really quickly, historically speaking. And that's worth celebrating.
Anything that forces us as a group, but anyway, even as an individual, to innovate.
Yes.
Is good.
Yes, exactly. Because, I mean, the weird thing is humans are good at, I mean, we are good at that. We don't like to do it necessarily, but we're good at it.
We're problem solvers. We're rats that can pretty much figure out how to get out of the maze.
But we like to, you know, we like to get in our comfort zone where we don't have to do that. So it's like we have to be kicked out a lot of times. And that's fine. It's just, you know, it's tiring for us, I guess. Maybe that's a way to think of it, is it's tiring for us to innovate, like in emergency situations. And so maybe that's part of what we're feeling right now, is we're just tired because we had to overhaul our lives, and then it sort of opened, and then it didn't open, and now it looks like it's open again, and we're still innovating, and people are still reeling, you know, in terms of businesses or travel. It's kind of like, how's that going to work or not work? And so there's still a lot of insecurity, along with being tired, along with a lot of broken trust. And I think these are the things, you know, we're definitely having to struggle with. Now, you'd mentioned an article you saw. Were those some of the,
it's funny.
Are we on to some of those issues that
trust is one of the ones that comes up. There's a piece that from the Psychiatric Times, Care of the Soul in the Time of COVID-19, from May 13th, 2020, by Ronald W. Pies, MD.
Okay.
We'll link to that, of course. He mentions in his piece that there are, but he says, just as the COVID-19 virus attacks the respiratory tract, the pandemic itself can assault the soul. And he identifies 5 manifestations of this, and he lists them as 1, impotence; 2, grief; 3, loneliness; 4, mistrust; and 5, displacement.
Yeah.
Now, we just touched on mistrust, a loss of trust, not just, well, in the institutions. Yeah, loss of trust in institutions, loss of trust in each other. And it kind of goes hand in hand with a pandemic, because when suddenly your best friend, the person that you love, can infect you.
Yeah.
When suddenly you look at your own children as potential sources of infection,
Right.
as opposed to as your children, this is weird.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
And so,
and I think too of the stories I've heard of people whose loved ones passed away, especially earlier on in this whole thing, and they were unable to see them as they knew they were dying, and then were even unable to have a gathering at the loss of somebody, because they had to wait, it's like, well, we can't do that now. And I guess on the positive side of that, it reinforces how important, those kinds of things are for us as human beings. I mean, just being present when a loved one is in their last days, moments, and then gathering with others who love that same person or had that connection with the same person to grieve their loss, in person, that those things are really important for us as human beings, which is kind of fascinating to me in a way, that matters so much. But again, it's highlighted because we weren't able to do that for a period of time.
I think the thing that made most churchgoers crazy is that it's about going to church. It is, and it's the thing that religious communities that a church provides, which is a sense of community. Yeah. To those who are members of that particular organization. Yeah. But that is part of what is really super important. That feeling of belonging to a group is it's hardwired into us. Yeah. We desperately need that. If we feel disconnected from the group, that's when terrible things happen. That's when we act out.
Well, I think that's where a lot of churches and places of worship, are so committed to a weekly physical presence gathering. And I think that that's where it became more of a political thing. I think for some people in the US, at least, was a physically for a governmental organization to say you can't, or to say you have to mask up, or to say whatever, was this odd additional threat in a setting where, because early on, I remember early on in this thing, there was a Presbyterian church, I think it was up in Oregon, that had choir practice, and they had antibacterial for everybody, and they tried to do everything at that point that it was like, it's okay if you do this, but that was just a mass spreading event. I mean, they did choir practice and everybody got it, and a bunch of people really badly. So there was already this threat by the pandemic, and then and their sense was then this kind of top-down approach. But the other part of it, and this is the other part of it, was this dependence upon physically present gatherings where you sing, that there was a sense that you couldn't do worship without those things. And I think that's one of the lessons I hope that the church has learned from this is that, actually there's a whole lot that can happen virtually and in other ways in your church community without being physically present. Not that you want to get rid of the physically present part of it, but we don't require it as much as, because I think a lot of people felt like if we can't meet in the church, then we can't practice our faith. And it's like, no, that's not actually true. That's going too far with that, because meeting in the service and singing and gathering, that's not the faith. It's certainly an important part of the faith, but that's not the faith. Nobody's saying you can't practice your faith if you can't go physically present to a church. And I think that I'm hoping that'll be a good reminder. I'm not sure if it will be, but I'm hoping it'll be a good reminder to people, because I think that made all the politics around it a little more volatile, to the point that I know from friends that relationships, even within particular churches, were broken because people had differing opinions on masking, on meeting, on whatever. And we should be about
enough.
Yeah, we don't need to destroy the relationships we've had with others over those kinds of issues. That you can certainly disagree and be upset about it, but that doesn't need to create so much mistrust. I mean, I know this one family that, because they wore masks and they were concerned about their kids, and this was in a part of the country where masking was suspect, but people started to doubt them in all sorts of other ways because of that one issue, even though they'd known them for decades. And that's where we've really got to be careful about this. And it's not just in area of religion or spirituality. There's so many ways that we could easily get caught up in that and break relationships over issues that, if you step back, it's like, was this really that important, or what?
Or more to the point, if it was really that important, my God, why?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Why?
How deep was our relationship in the first place? If this is enough to blow the relationship, then that says that maybe we weren't going as deep with each other as we thought we were. Because how much do we put up with family members when they don't do things the way we think they should do it? Well, that doesn't mean they're not family members anymore. In most situations, you deal with it, right? So I would think religious communities should have a depth, at least, of that. At least some of them, they call each other brother and sister. So how about not blowing up the boat, just because of that one thing? But
or quit calling each other brother and sister if you don't mean it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, save that for when you're really ready to make that kind of a commitment, because that is a commitment that goes well beyond, these types of issues. But again, to me,
you say, damn it.
Yeah. Well, and to me, again, it's like, I was just working on my book there, and one of the chapters, just thinking through, you had the tabernacle first, and the tabernacle was ideally suited for a nomadic people. It was a tent, a very nice one, but it broke down easily. It was built up easily wherever you were staying, but then once you got Jerusalem and you've got a kingdom starting, well, guess what? It's time to move on from the tabernacle and let's build a temple, right?
Concrete people.
Yeah. So it's like, so the fact is, there is innovation even within our religious traditions that has happened quite a bit. I mean, that's just skimming the surface of the issue of the innovation that's gone on in Judaism. But and it's like that innovation is there, but again, people tend to not want to innovate. It's tiring. It's a lot of work. It's confusing. So it's much easier to, yeah. And so, but we need to. These days, this post-pandemic world, we don't have the opportunity to not adapt, to not innovate, because there's so many things changing right now. Because people may not have noticed, but the pandemic's not the only issue we're dealing with at this point. So, it's time for innovation. It's
all the others.
Yeah, it is. So, so we need to find our strength somewhere. And I think that's the other thing I just wanted to mention is, where do we find our kind of recharge in this time that we find ourselves in? How do we get our energy back, our focus back, our wisdom back? What do we need to do to find it?
One of the words that Dr. Pies used of one of his 5,
yeah,
that it surprised me when I first read it, and the more I think of it, the more spot on it is. It's impotence.
Yeah.
And I think what you were referring to earlier, the rage that people felt about the government's pandemic response, is that an awful lot of that I think came from a feeling of impotence. When in essence the entire economy was shut down, how else can one feel when you can't go to work, or
Right.
your work no longer exists, but through no fault of yours? You didn't do anything. You just, it was there 1 minute and the next it was gone.
Yeah. No,
How else can one feel but impotent in the face of so many things?
But and I totally get it, and I think we have to, you have to grieve that and work through that. That's just how we work as humans. But the fact is, you're not as impotent as you think you are. That's the other trick, is you got to work through that, because guess what? We are innovative, we are adaptive. There are other things out there, and you're going to figure it out. You've got to just stay in the game. You've got to keep working at it.
But by the same token, yes, each and every one of these, whether it's impotence, grief, loneliness, the mistrust, or the displacement, these things, they all have cures.
Yeah.
They all can be fixed one way or the other. Displacement is the other one that, that kind of is walks hand in hand with impotence.
Yeah, no, and that's something that definitely speaks to me as well. Because there is a feeling, there's just, the rhythm of life that we set up does a lot to reinforce our sense of identity and purpose and meaning and all of that, and feeling good about what we're doing and all of that. But when all of that is taken away, then suddenly we're not getting that reinforcement. I mean, I've experienced that by not being a pastor in a local church, because, certainly there were things that were frustrating with that as well, like any job, but there was also a way that I had a role to play. It told me who I was. On the mornings that I'd wake up, with kind of like, man, who am I? What am I doing? As soon as I got to church, it was like, oh yeah, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. This is where I go, but when the pandemic kind of ripped that away from a lot of us or changed it, maybe didn't rip it away, but like changed it in such a way that we're kind of like, wait a minute, I was the competent person when we were meeting in the office, and now I'm having to figure out how to work Zoom, and I don't have a clue how to pull this thing off. It was very disconcerting. So I feel like I definitely have experienced that as well.
It's by taking a lot of people out of their office environments. Yeah. And making so many people work from home. Mm-hmm. It's separated, some people survive simply on their social skills. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what they're good for in a workplace environment, is their social skills, their work product. Actually, well, now when you actually have to look at it, this person, because really, this is, the group dynamic doesn't work the same way. Right. Right. No, it really doesn't. And, there are people that are really good in person that don't show up well on a Zoom call.
And there are people that aren't good in person that suddenly in a Zoom call, they can light it up, man, you know, because, and I mean, there's a whole new set of skills, different people stand out. So it just kind of changes everything. And again, it comes back to that adaptation though, is you've got to be willing to innovate and adapt and learn. And, you know, you and I are the age where, you know, learning's not as exciting in some cases as it used to be. It's like, oh man, I've got to.
It can be terrifying because,
yeah.
You know, with technology, it's not like there's someone standing beside you saying, well, here's how it works. Here, I'll explain this kindly and gently to you. There's no explanation.
Right.
Any instructions with anything anymore. You have to go online to find them. If you can go online to find them.
Yeah, because you know, you look for there's the little help thing. I'll type in what I'm looking for there. And then you're like, okay, there's nothing. I don't even know how to ask for help about this thing, much less find the help I need.
The thing I need help.
That's right. Yeah, you know, I mean,
I feel so impotent.
That's right. You know, and I think that's, I mean, the other thing for me is that I've gotten out of practice in some things that are pretty important as human beings. An example is I met a guy yesterday at a cafe. We had a great conversation for like 2 hours. It was wonderful, you know, just loved it.
Strangers again, Randy?
That's right. No, but I mean, it was like, wow, we're physically here. We're having a great conversation. I don't do this as much as I used to. And then, you know, by the time I walked back home, and I got to the house, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got like a headache behind my eyes. My brain is tired. It's like, I'm out of practice. You know, it's like, of course I enjoyed it, but I wasn't used to having, you know, a 2-hour conversation with somebody physically, you know, right there. That I just was out of practice. But so we're going to have to relearn things too. Like, oh yeah, that's important. How do I do that again? You know, I don't
realizing know. that the rest of the body language exists outside this bloody box.
Yes, that's right.
And all the other communication that really, because when you sit in a room with someone, we communicate. Words are just a little teeny piece
percentage
of how
and
what
thing.
we communicate to each other.
Right.
Even on a pheromonal level.
Yeah.
There's so much happening inside a room. It just ain't the same.
It's not. You just get out of practice. I mean, it's just, and I think there are multiple things like that where after a couple of years of this stuff, we're just kind of out of practice. You know, if there's a problem with our car, you know, we've had a couple of things that needed to be handled, but it was like a much bigger deal than it used to be. Cause like, okay, now I got to drive the car over to the place, and then will they be able to give me a ride back, or because of the pandemic, they won't? Will I walk back, which could be a long walk, or, you know, because we only have one car right now. You know, but it was just like, there was just all this stuff that was like, you know, it didn't used to be that big of a deal. Oh, I got to take the car in. Okay, I'll take the car in, you know, but now it's like, oh, I got to take the car. Okay, I need a mask. I don't know. It just, there's all this extra stuff. And I don't know. I am really, I don't know what happens around your house. I'll be honest on this podcast, but like by 8:30, I mean, we're pretty wiped out. We get up early. We do get up early, but it's like by, you know, I don't know how many days Cheryl and I have said, wow, it's only 5 o'clock and we feel like it's 9:30, you know, and it's like, all right, if we can hold out a few more hours, you know, and it
hurry sundown.
Yeah. And again, it's like, is it just taking a lot more psychic energy to make it through each day? Are there less things that energize us that were, you know, I used to love, you know, I'd take long drives for the work that I had, and there was something really renewing about just going on a trip out to the Palm Desert area or something and then coming back. Well, I don't do that anymore. I mean, that's not a part of my job either. But with the pandemic, it was like, but it's like, okay, well, would I be better if I like did take those road trips every once in a while? Would that get me more energy? Because it used to be important. I don't know. It's going to be, to me, it'd be fun talking to people about like, what habits have you reintroduced into your life now? And which ones of them were useful and helpful, and which ones you're kind of like, yeah, I don't really need this anymore. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear
it's as we shift here in California from pandemic stance to endemic stance.
Yeah.
All right, this is no longer about hiding from each other. It's learning to live with each other again.
Yeah. And even the mask stuff is like, okay, wait. Okay, so I'm going here. When do I wear a mask or not wear a mask? It's funny. Cheryl and I will walk the Rose Bowl every once in a while, and we take our masks because you have to, right? But then if we stop by the clubhouse to use the restroom while we're walking, you gotta have the mask on, and then come back out and walk. Well, there've been 2 or 3 times where Cheryl's like, "Are you going to take your mask off?" And I'm kind of like, "Oh, well, it's kind of cold this morning, so I think I'm just going to leave it on." But you're right, it's still on, and I forgot to take it off. And it's just like, I mean, that's like that. I never did any of that prior to the pandemic. It's like, but now it's like, oh, do I have a mask? Do I have enough masks for whatever needs to happen? Does everybody have a mask before we go do this? And then as these things shift, it's like, okay, wait. So it's a restaurant, but it's outside. So do I wear a mask until I get to the table, and then once I sit down and they bring the water, I can take the mask off? Or do I not need a mask at all, or what? I don't know.
You suppose someday we'll look back on all this kind of fondly? Hey, remember how confusing it was? Yeah, that was funny.
I think so. I mean, my experience as a human thus far says yes, because I mean, one of the other wonderful things about being human is you tend to forget a lot of the hassles that are not the huge ones that wounded you, but like the hassles that those just tend to fade into the distance in your memory. And you remember exactly like that you can talk about annoyances in a new way. So yeah,
how angry you got when the masks came in, the ones that go behind the ears, that go behind the head and the shoulder. Like, no, I didn't want that.
Yeah, and the opposite type of thing, which is like, I was talking to I took an Uber somewhere, and I was talking to the driver, and I said, "Man, wasn't it awesome on the 5 freeway when the pandemic hit?" He said, "Oh man." He said, "It was great." I said, "You were still out there?" He said, "Oh yeah, I got fares and stuff." He said, "But I could go anywhere really quickly because of the pandemic." And then it's like, then you feel bad, like, oh wait, I'm celebrating something because I mean, this pandemic. But it was like, that was really nice to go down the 5 freeway and not have any other cars for a few times that I did that. And of course now it's like, there was a bakery I'd take Sam to early in the morning, because there was just nothing there. You could get to the bakery in no time. Well, now there's no way we could pull it off because of the traffic. It's just, we couldn't get there and back before school if we wanted to, So it's funny. There's those kind of things as well that are like, wow, that was kind of a silver lining in the pandemic, and that's gone. But I guess I'm actually happier that the pandemic's over, but I kind of miss that at the same time. So,
it created experiences that were unique.
Yes. And those stories will be around. I mean, we'll be able to tell people, I can't wait until I'm older and a grandfather, a great grandfather will say, "Well, let me tell you about the time when I went through that pandemic back there. Yeah, let me tell you what we did. We wore masks. You wouldn't believe, that'll be fun."
Well, we haven't had a world war yet, but we have had a pandemic, and that kind of, that's right. I don't know that we will come out of this looking like anyone's idea of a greatest generation.
I kind of doubt it.
I'm not seeing that for us.
Yeah, I'm still hoping for some kind of legacy, but that's not the legacy I'm expecking for
the greatest generation. And then there was these louses.
Right. What were these people thinking? And we'll say, hey, we adapted. Okay, we innovated and adapted. That's what we did. That's our claim to fame. So yep.
On that bombshell.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, and I feel like this is a conversation that's just going to keep going, because we're just climbing out, and who knows what the impact's going to be. So we we shall see. But hey, everybody who's out there, thanks for being with us, and
As always,
keep going for it. Keep adapting and innovating. You can do it, and find ways to recharge yourself, because you got it. That's where you got to innovate big time. What is it that gets you back up? You know,
there is a cure. There is a
Yeah.
cure. Hey, we got out of the one. We with a little hard work, we can get out of the other.
Yep.
Thanks as always, Randy.
Thank you, Alan. Enjoyed it.
See you next time.